accuse New Labour of being as slow to act as the last government. That's despite promises of funding to study the effects of chemical warfare agents, widely blamed for the mystery illnesses. Anis Risley has this report.
This weekend, British Gulf War veterans will be marching on the Ministry of Defence to hand back their medals in a furious protest at the government's inaction over Gulf War syndrome. The soldiers are demanding a full and independent inquiry into the illness with influential backing.
These men and women have a very strong and, in my view, justified sense of grievance, because although the precise cause of their illness may not have been able to be established, there's no doubt that it comes as a result of their service in the Gulf.
Dr. Garan Jamal, a leading neurologist from Glasgow, is convinced that some veterans have suffered serious nerve damage, but has been unable to continue his groundbreaking studies due to lack of government funding. Calling for further tests, he believes the illnesses were caused by exposure to organophosphates, to anti-nerve gas tablets and chemical warfare agents possibly released by the Iraqis. Latest American research provides similar conclusions, confirming what British soldiers had long suspected. They say the side effects began while they were still in the Gulf, and the findings come as no surprise. The truth could have enormous implications for the victims, not least because of potential compensation claims running perhaps into millions. Anis Risley, ITN.
There's to be an inquiry into why police shot dead a man in his flat in Hastings. But the Chief Constable of Sussex has said he's satisfied his officers acted properly, even though the man's understood to have been unarmed. 3 other men were arrested during the drugs and firearms raid, and a woman's been treated in hospital for shock. Our South of England correspondent Adrian Britton reports.
The scene is still cordoned off as an inquiry from an outside police force examines why an unarmed man was shot dead in his home. It was just after 4 o'clock when 4 armed officers raided a flat in the Bedsit area of Hastings. James Ashley, a 39-year-old man from Liverpool, was in bed with his girlfriend. What prompted one officer to shoot is unclear, but Ashley was shot once in the chest and, despite attempts by police to resuscitate him, was dead by the time paramedics arrived. The Sussex Chief Constable says his officers were searching for cocaine and firearms and were justified in carrying arms.
If we had no reason to believe that the man would be violent, it would be unnecessary to carry out an armed operation. So it follows that in these circumstances, the man is always thought to be violent.
Hastings, like many of Britain's seaside resorts, has become renowned for drug dealing. Police use sniffer dogs to search the flat for drugs. As scenes of crime, officers kept the area sealed off. Their forensic evidence will be scrutinised by Barbara Wilding, an assistant chief constable from Kent who is leading the inquiry. 3 other men arrested at the time of the shooting are in police custody. They're being interviewed about an attempted murder in the town last week. Police can only fire their weapons in life-threatening situations. The inquiry by Kent Police will have to establish whether, as Sussex Police claim, James Ashley presented such a threat.
The trial continues today of the 4 schoolboys aged 10 and 11 accused of rape and assault. The Old Bailey heard a 10-year-old girl tell how she was attacked in the school toilets by her classmates. The boys are thought to be Britain's youngest ever rape defendants. NASA is expected to confirm today that the veteran astronaut John Glenn is preparing to make a dramatic return to space at the ripe old age of 76. The man who became the first American to orbit Earth in 1962 is now expected to break another record and become the oldest man in space. Senator Glenn has volunteered to be part of a study on the impact of weightlessness on the aging process. NASA's sensational claim in August 1996 that there may have been life on Mars has been seriously weakened. New findings reveal that the organic material said to contain the first signs of extraterrestrial life found in a Martian meteorite which came down in Antarctica originated from Earth. Our science editor Lawrence McGinty explains.
This is part of the Martian meteorite that's causing a bitter scientific row. British experts say NASA's initial conclusion that the meteorite could contain fossilised footprints of Martian life is still right. They say 2 new reports, which dismiss the evidence, are just plain wrong.
I don't think the original paper by the American scientists, I don't think that was sufficient proof that there was life on Mars. I also don't think that these 2 papers prove that there was not life on Mars. I think we need much, much firmer evidence.
The Martian meteorite may not look much, but it has an incredible life story. Scientists are sure it formed on Mars very early in that planet's life, 4.5 billion years ago. NASA scientists argue that around 2.5 billion years ago, the rock was exposed to Martian life forms, which left an imprint. Then, a mere 16 million years ago, a meteorite hit Mars and the rock was ejected into space. For eons, it floated between the planets of the solar system. Then 13,000 years ago, it approached Earth and crashed into the Antarctic. There it lay until only 13 years ago, when it was discovered by American explorers. All meteorites from Mars that land on Earth are contaminated. The question is, does that prove they don't contain traces of Martian life?
The analogy simply is, if you've got a bag of sugar, you find a few grains of dust in it, it doesn't mean to say you've got a complete bag of dust. You've got some other sugar in there as well.
One thing is sure, until robot missions bring back a sample of Mars, we'll never know whether life existed or exists on the red planet.
And now to our look at the papers, and dominating most front pages this
It's one of the most active and dangerous volcanoes in the world, and this week, once again, Etna has come alive. First came the earthquakes, then blasting from the summit, an explosion of red-hot boulders and lava flowing down the slopes. The volcano is smoking and bubbling, unstable and unpredictable. The largest volcano in Europe, spewing lava by day and by night. In the nearest town, they're holding their breath and assessing the damage the earthquakes did to their 300-year-old church. On the slopes of Etna, they're staying put for now, still rebuilding after the last eruption. It's normal, he says. Etna does this all the time. When Mount Etna does erupt, it can have an awesome power. I'm more than a mile from the rim of the crater. This farmhouse didn't survive the last eruption, buried under a raging torrent of molten rock and lava. Scientists say this week's eruption is dangerous, and there's so much lava near the surface that Etna is very dangerous.
The next eruption will be very, very strong, perhaps more than the last one.
The last eruption in 1992 destroyed hundreds of homes, millions of tons of lava pouring more than 2 miles down Etna's slopes. The old men know this week could be dangerous, but they also remember the eruption of 1927, which was. It's a small thing, he says, so far. But just to be sure, the younger men are putting fresh flowers on the shrines that ring the volcano. Bill Neely, ITN, on Mount Etna in Sicily.
Indonesia has announced sweeping reforms to pull the country back from the brink of economic disaster. Veteran President Suharto, widely blamed for the crisis, is trying to save his own political future by agreeing to a tough package laid down by the IMF. The new measures include revising the nation's budget and scrapping subsidies, which benefit his own widespread family interests. The United Nations have handed back control of the town of Vukovar to the Croatians after a 2-year process of peaceful reintegration. Serbs reduced the regional capital to ruins during a 3-month siege in the bitter civil war in the former Yugoslavia, forcing some 80,000 Croats into exile. Our senior foreign correspondent Michael Nicholson recorded the fall of Vukovar in 1991. He's been back to record its rebirth.
Croats and Serbs, in their distinctive national dress that emphasized their separateness, danced to celebrate their unity in Vukovar, a town reborn. During the war, the Croats called this their Stalingrad, the place of the martyrs. In the 3-month siege of shelling and starvation, it became known as the place of death. But only now, 6 years on, and under UN supervision, have the survivors been allowed to the burial grounds to find their dead and put names to the crosses. On the day Vukovar surrendered, we found baby Sanya in the underground hospital, and with shrapnel in her stomach, she was not expected to live, but she survived the war and the peace. And today, all these years on, she returned with her family to the center of Vukovar, to her birthplace, and to what had once been her home. The Croatian government has pledged to rebuild, free every house destroyed here, and the Vidic family are determined to return once theirs is standing again. But how will the resident Serbs react when the Croats begin to come back? Until now, they've always assumed that Vukovar was theirs to keep, the prize of war. They've made their homes and their businesses here. The older ones I spoke to intend staying. And why not, they ask me. We get a Croatian government pension. But many Serbs are living in repaired Croat houses, like this man. He must leave when the owner returns. But what happens then, he asked? Where do I go with my family? This family knows where. For them, leaving is the only option. The prospect of living with Croats is not. So it's off to who knows where, back into Serbia. The Croatian government is rushing money here, rebuilding offices, factories, creating jobs, all of which, according to the man now responsible for monitoring Vukovar's recovery and reconciliation, is vital.
You need to have an economic revival of the region, because if you cannot guarantee to the people that they can have a decent life in this area, that they will have a job, then it becomes very difficult, of course.
Making it more difficult are the schools. Instead of bringing Serb and Croat children together, the curriculum is pushing them apart. They are taught in separate languages from separate textbooks. These Croat children are in one classroom, these Serb children are in another. It's called protecting ethnic minority rights, but it doesn't make for the one nation identity that's so crucial if Vukovar is to prosper again.
What has been handed back is a town of ruin and rubble. But for Croatians, today symbolically represents the ending of their war. What matters now is that men keep their promises, and that this UN-engineered accord can persuade the Croat and the Serb to live peacefully once again. If it works, after so many years of hatred and savagery, it'll be no mean achievement.
Another new magazine